Hey, everyone. Wow, I never get a response back. That's pretty cool. So it feels a little bit weird standing up here on stage today talking about Node and Microsoft because, well, there's no good way to put this. It's just that I've never really been the biggest fan of JavaScript. And so you can imagine my surprise when I started seeing all these people ranging from startups to large-scale enterprises who were jumping on the Node bandwagon. And for a while, I just didn't get it. Because, JavaScript was great and all, it just, I never really considered using it in, I don't know, say, production. And so I think 2 years later, I think now I finally get it. And so I want to try and share that aha moment with you all. That wasn't quite the aha moment, but I guess it's somewhat true. The aha moment was really that when we're building an application, we're optimizing for a bunch of different factors, right? We're optimizing for speed, flexibility, and productivity. And it's not just about optimizing for one thing or another. And I think that Node in particular, what struck me was that it strikes a good balance between the three of these properties, right? So from the speed front, it's super fast, right? It's asynchronous and it's non-blocking by default. And that by default is really important because when I initially started jumping into it, I was like, yeah, I've used C#, we have this async await thing, what's the big deal, right? But one of the powerful things is that it's not just kind of like an add-on feature later on, right? The entire ecosystem has grown up around this asynchronous and non-blocking model, which means that every package that you download actually has this, you can make that assumption about it. And I think that's really cool. It was also built on Chrome's V8 engine, right? And at the time, it was actually the fastest JavaScript engine around. And it also has a very lightweight and optimized core. But then kind of moving forward, right, a little bit of code goes a long way. And that was another ththing that absolutely impressed me was just the growth of the community and how many incredible applications that people were building and just how accessible the server side became to a whole slew of developers who had never really been doing any of that before. So I think that's really cool. And then the last piece is, I know there's is that you can sort of develop how you want. And so I know there's all this talk about microservices and everything like that. But, oftentimes it's easier to just start with a monolithic application. There's nothing wrong with that, right? It's easier to just conceptualize and reason about. But then over time, the needs that you might have are going to change, and you might not want to scale things, or you can have the option to choose between dynamic typing or static typing with Typescript. And so I think the flexibility there is really powerful. And so to me, that was what kind of, that aha moment, that's what turned me from a skeptic into just going all in on Node. But that's why Node's so exciting. But why does Microsoft care about Node? And the truth is, well, it's not us, it's you. You're building all of these absolutely incredible applications. You're building up this incredible community. And we want to support you in those efforts. And we think we can. But anytime I say this, undoubtedly, the response goes something like this. Hey, Microsoft, if Node is so important to you, why don't you fix blank? And typically, one of three things follows. And you could probably guess the first one. Hey, Microsoft, if Node's so important to you, why don't you fix MaxPath? It's like, so for the uninitiated, some time ago, we decided that 260 characters was a reasonable file path length limitation. And turns out we were wrong. And we're sorry about that. And so what would happen is that you would, NPM installs modules in a nested fashion, and so eventually you can imagine that dependency chain gets really, really long, and you would exceed your maximum file path, and it didn't help that you couldn't even delete the folder once you had exceeded it. So it was generally a mess. And luckily, though, there's actually been a lot of progress in this space. And NPM v3 came out, and the NPM folks did an absolutely fantastic job on that. So it installs paths maximally flat by default, and that alone has gotten rid of a lot of the challenges that people have had. But we're also working on making a lot of other improvements to the ecosystem itself. So with .NET in particular, .NET Core actually now supports long file paths. So that's pretty cool. And we've also been talking to the Windows team, but those talks are still underway, and it's always hard when it comes to ecosystem changes because it takes some time for things to percolate. But there's been actually a lot of progress, and so that's really exciting to see. The second one is native modules on Windows. So does anyone remember this thread? Because I do. It got to about 500 comments or so. Here's the problem with the thread, is that the title is extremely broad. And the problem with broad thread titles, well, this one in particular, is that the discussion tends to go kind of all over the place. And in this case, what happened is that it sort of became a place for everyone who was generally unhappy and happened to be on Windows. So that was a lot of fun. Now, the core issue, though, was that native modules are confusing. So native modules are when you're using a bunch of C++ and your JavaScript. And so it can actually get really confusing when you start seeing all these cryptic C++ compiler errors. And it didn't really help that with Windows, actually configuring your machine to even be able to npm install some native module involved installing some 8 gigabytes of full-blown Visual Studio. And turns out people didn't really like that. And so people were never really sure whether it was a configuration issue or whether it was an issue with the particular package that they were using, and so things got generally messy. So one thing that we actually did end up doing is we contributed we released the Visual C++ build tools, which was a minimal set of all of the required dependencies that anyone actually needed, and we were able to thereby simplify the instructions a whole lot for Windows, and so. That's fixed a lot of people's issues, and then that wasn't enough, though, so we actually ended up also creating an npm package that you could just install in order to install all of the C++ build tools. And throughout the course of actually testing that, I'm actually a little bit embarrassed to admit this, because this wasn't very secure. While I was testing this, I ended up just getting a list of all of the native modules, and I said, I ran a script that just said install everything, and then write out all of these any errors or anything that you see out into a log, and then I would go through and inspect every single error, and then see whether it was something that maybe we needed to update the build tools to actually fix, or whether it was just an issue with the package, and so just investigating all of those different errors. And throughout the course of that, I started developing this spidey sense for some of the issues that people would run into with native modules and the common install issues, and actually ended up with this nice little cheat sheet of hey, if you see errors about Python, this is probably what you should do. And if you see errors about MS Build or the PC compiler or anything like that, then it's probably a Windows configuration issue. If you see things about NaN or Node or V8 or IOJS, then it's probably a Node versioning issue that's incompatible with that version of the package. Or other syntax errors or missing command file or header files or anything like that. And so hopefully you all find that table somewhat helpful. I know I have when it just comes to pointing people when they were running into various problems with just place other options to start exploring rather than just feeling totally stuck. And the thread is now closed, which is incredible. And I actually did some informal sentiment analysis, and it's totally not statistically significant because we just had that talk yesterday. But it turns out that Windows users are now like 41% happier, so that's nice to see. So the last one was the Windows CLI, and I think a lot of people have heard about this. So we asked, hey, what is it that we could actually improve about the CLI? Because a lot of people would be coming to us and complaining about it. And really, what people just wanted was Bash on Windows, and so now that's available in the Windows subsystem for Linux. And yeah, so if you, it's in preview now, so if you have, and you're on the insiders builds of Windows, like it would actually be really great to get some feedback and see how that's working for you. So now that we got all of that out of the way, because those are like the top things that will pop to the top on any Hacker News thread or anything like that, I hope you'll believe me when I say that we really want you to be as productive as possible with Node. And as a part of those efforts, I want to focus on how we're bringing some of the magic of Visual Studio to the Node ecosystem, and to the Node development processes. And in particular, we have a couple of different tooling offerings, right? So we have Visual Studio Code, which is our new free cross-platform lightweight editor, and it has debugging and code completions and a whole lot more cool customizations for Node. And then if you're a fan of Visual Studio, we also actually have Node tooling built into Visual Studio as well. But today I'm going to be focusing on Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to be doing all my demos in that. And so as part of the demo, we're going to be building a Twitter bot. And because the cool thing about working on dev tools is that, like, in order to actually test the application, you just build other random applications, and they don't have to be particularly useful, so we can have a lot of fun with that. And so let's go ahead and switch into the demo. So we'll go to VS Code right over here. And can all of you see that OK? Is font size good? No? Make it bigger? Is that better? Awesome. OK. So here we are in VS Code. And what we're going to do is we're going to be building a Twitter bot that will send back inspirational tweets anytime that I tweet. Helps calm the nerves on stage over here. And in particular, one thing actually that's vitally important, I just noticed this, we're going to need to comment out the sentience because we don't want this bot going rogue. So it's vitally important. And what you see is that it's pretty simple. Whenever I tweet, and this is my actual handle because when I test things, I like to test them in production. And so whenever I tweet, it's going to go ahead and it's going to find some inspirational tweet, and my bot is going to reply. But before we get into any of that, I just want to show you some of the cool features of the editor. And so one thing that I mentioned is that it has some really intelligent code completions. And so I can go ahead and I can type this function, and let's just call it multiply. And we're going to throw in 2 arguments. We're going to throw in a and b. And we're going to return a divided by b. Not actually, we're going to return a times b, because that's how we do multiplication. And we're going to assign that to a result. And one thing that you'll notice is that right now it's saying that A can be any type and B can be any type, because we don't know what they could be, because it's JavaScript, and that's how it works. But the moment that I've used it, you'll see that we actually start flowing those types through. And so we detect that the result is actually going to be a number. And then we can dot into the result, and we can see that we're getting completions that are for numbers. And so we start getting some of this just more semantically correct IntelliSense. IntelliSense, by the way, when I say that, I actually mean code completions, but it's our like Microsoft-y marketing term for it. So sorry if I drift into that sometimes. And so that's pretty cool, right? But let's say that we want to go ahead and you can see that we can go ahead and we can add JS.comments, right? And we can add hello. We can hover over something. We can see, hey, this is the documentation behind it. But we can go even further than that, right? And so all of this kind of builds up to this more powerful experience where you see that we can actually start going and checking out all of the different references that we have to everything. And I actually really like this peek view because it shows you everything in line. Or we can just jump to the screen ratio is a little bit weird, or we can just jump to the definition by hitting F12. And so that's really neat, and that'll work all for your actual code that you're writing, but it'll also work for a lot of the modules that you're using. So right now, for instance, I can go ahead and I can fs dot, and I can see code completions for all of the built-in Node modules. And where that's coming from is actually these typings files over here. And the way I got there is, or the way that we ended up downloading that is, I said typings, install, and then I use Node. And what's typings? Well, it's this repository of all of these community contributed. It's basically like documentation that's computer readable in a way. But this community contributed content that was originally for TypeScript, but we actually end up using it and benefiting from it in JavaScript, which is pretty cool. And so let's say that we want to go ahead and we want to use Express. And we can say, OK, well, I want to require Express. And I want to be able to start dotting into it. Right now, you'll see that I'm not getting anything special for it. So how do we get that? Well, I'll say typings install dt squiggly express -- global. And that'll go ahead and install the Express typings into here. Now, see, the problem with this was actually twofold. So it turns out, and actually, so yesterday I had this conversation with a few people, and it turns out, and I didn't really realize this until recently, but so I'm actually allergic to nuts. So I'm allergic to all nuts except for peanuts, which is kind of weird. But that's yeah, who knows? And I actually carry this EpiPen around with me. And so if ever I have an allergic reaction, I can actually go and I can get some epinephrine dosage. But what I found out yesterday was there are actually, and I didn't know this, there are actually some people who are allergic to Microsoft. And so what would happen is that people would see this typings folder and then be like, what are you doing over there, Microsoft? You trying to put TypeScript into my project? What's your aim here? It's like, well, no. Like, what are you going to do next? You going to just start downloading Windows? And it's like, no. That doesn't even make any sense. And so it was like, well, TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript, and so we figured that we were doing all of this effort around all the and our tooling for Java for TypeScript, that we wanted to be able to benefit from that in JavaScript. And so our JavaScript language service is actually powered by TypeScript. And so that way we can reduce duplication and take advantage of all the cool work that the TypeScript community has been doing to actually benefit JavaScript. So that's why there's some weird TypeScript things lying around. But for the most part, people didn't really like that. And also, this command, typings install dt squiggly, like, I could never even remember that. And then I don't even know what the dash dash global thing is. And it used to be dash dash ambient, and I don't even know what that meant. So it was just generally confusing. And so recently, what we've actually been doing is trying to make this a whole lot easier to configure. And so this is, so rather than dealing with any of that, I have a trick up my sleeve. So I'm going to just go to the workspace settings. And the settings, right, so the default settings open up on the left-hand side. The settings, my local settings open up on the right-hand side. And you'll see that there's this Typescript.experimental automatic type acquisition flag. I'm just going to go ahead and change that to true. And so right now, and I'm going to restart the editor, and sure. I don't know what changes are there, but we'll go ahead and save them. And so now, I can actually start dotting into Express, and I can see that I'm actually getting code completions. And better yet, nothing was actually added to our project here. All of this is just happening in the background and is abstracted away so you don't have to deal with it. And so that's one last step, and then you don't have to deal with any Microsoft allergic reactions, although I do have this available if anyone is having any trouble here. OK, so those are some of the cool IntelliSense or code completions, intelligent code completions, there we go, features. But let's go ahead, now that we've written our app, let's go ahead and actually start running it. And so I have actually you could run Node in the command line and just run it with server.js, but I have a debugger configured, right? And so I'm going to go ahead and start that. And my app is going to start. And I'm going to continue forward, past all of these different breakpoints. And we're going to go ahead and tweet something, right? So I think I probably have to increase my font sizes there. So in the whole love story spirit, I looked up a bunch of Shakespeare quotes and modified them slightly. And so let's go ahead and send this tweet through. And as you can see, I sent it through, and now I've hit this onTweet function, and I can continue. And I can continue forward some more. And actually, one thing to note is, in addition to just tweeting back the nice inspirational reply, so I emailed our CEO, Satya, the other day, and I asked him if I could have unconditional access to his Twitter account, because I thought it would be cool if he could tweet at me instead. But that didn't actually, he didn't really respond for some reason. And so we actually have the next best thing, which is a Satya bobblehead. And I have the code that generates all of the bobblehead. You could just create your own bobblehead, so it's a lot of fun later on. So I'll give you the link to that. And so it's going to go ahead and reply with that, right? And so it's going to get the inspirational tweet. I can continue. And then I can go back, and you can see. And let's see if we have a response back. I have a response back, but undefined. That's not very inspiring. Let's go ahead and see what that is. What's going wrong? And luckily, we have a debugger. So let's go ahead and rerun the application. And this time, we're going to step in and see why I'm getting undefined over here. I'm going to just close this. So I think I had another good Shakespeare quote for this, which is this one here. Undefined is the root of all heartache. Love is the root of all heartache was before. I just kind of did a find and replace. And so we got ahead and tweeted, and we've hit our onTweet breakpoint. And this time, what we're going to do is when we're getting the status, is actually try and step into that and figure out what's going on. So I'm going to step into this time, and I'm going to step over, and I see that my message is indeed undefined. And Ah, I see what it is. The index looks to be 7.26, so it looks like what I forgot was a math.floor. So let's go ahead and change that, restart the app, and then hopefully it'll all work. And one thing while we're here, this is the rest of our debugging view. And you can see all the, I can add watch variables, and I can look at the call stack, and actually navigate through all of that here. So I'm going to close that pane. And then I'm going to continue. Did I restart it? I don't know. I don't remember. I think I restarted it. No, I didn't. Oh, right. I see. Anyway, so I'm going to continue. Just start the application again. And then, here's my other quote. The earth has music for those whose server.listen. Now we can go ahead. Stopped another breakpoint. Right, so this time when we get the status, cool. One cool cat. All right, I like it. And now we can go ahead and take a look. And awesome. So it's all posted. So our app is working. So in addition to just some code completions and debugging support, we also have a bunch of other neat customizations, right? Because I think one of the interesting challenges about building an editor, right, is that you can't really anticipate all of the different environments and configurations that people might be running with. And so we want to make sure that whatever we build works for your environment and works for the actual configurations that people are coming in with, and works with all the different tool sets that are all available, right? So it doesn't restrict you in any way, but at the same time somehow enhances your experience. And so we also have some neat little things, like I can go and I can look at the debugger launch configuration, and you can see that, let's say I want to use NodeMon actually to run my process, right? So NodeMon is great because it means that I can iterate a little bit more quickly on my app. And so I'm going to run NodeMon with debug break, and I'm going to run server.js. And you'll see in the launch configuration, I have this restart true. And so what this is going to do is it's going to tell VS Code, hey, I want you to restart the process whenever it's terminated. So and that'll happen whenever I change the code, right? And so it'll go ahead and it'll stop on the first line because I specified the debug break flag. And I'm going to continue, and we can go ahead and debug. But this time, let's say that I realize that actually, maybe I don't want to use my username. I want to use, someone else's username. I don't know, anyone want a username that in this? No? OK. I'll just add an S there. Way more creative. And you can see that the process now actually restarts. And so this makes it a whole lot easier to actually debug and iterate more quickly on your app. And then beyond that, right, so lots of people using Grunt and Gulp, right? If I press Control-Shift-B, what I can do is actually configure a task runner, right? And you have a whole bunch of choices. You can choose Grunt, Gulp, NPM, whatever you so please. And so you have a lot of these cool customizations available for you. So now that we finished our code, everything looks like it's working, we can go ahead and commit it, right? So it's working. Lots of exclamation points. And stage all those changes. And then continue. Great. So Let's see. I don't actually see a time up here. How much time do I have left? 5 minutes. OK. So that was actually like running early. Normally I'm running late, so that's actually pretty cool. Yesterday, Brian went through some of the time travel debugging stuff with Chakra Core. And so I was kind of jealous because like I like doing that demo. And so I thought it was pretty cool. So I figured that like I would just kind of do a quick encore of that, but with like a slightly different focus, which is yesterday we started getting a lot of questions about like, hey, how does this whole thing work? Kind of seems like magic, right? So how does time travel debugging work? And I thought it'd be pretty cool to explain. So you can go ahead and switch over to the demo, and then you can see that it also works with multiple applications, so it doesn't just work on Brian's machine. Let's go ahead and add our tweet. I already had it prepared. If for any Doctor Who fans in the audience. And yes, we can go ahead and launch TTD as well. So time travel debugging is actually pretty interesting. Oh, my bad. This is probably a little bit too early. Huh, OK. Well, I'm glad that Brian did the demo yesterday, so maybe it does only work on his machine. Hold on, I think I had some issues with threads tying up earlier, so I'm just going to go ahead and try that one more time. Actually, it's working, maybe? OK, so time travel debugging is actually kind of interesting. It's not a new field. It's an area of research that's actually been around for something like 20 or 30 years. But one of the key innovations in this case, right, is so what does it take to actually step backwards into an application? Well, over time, you want to be able to, I don't know, for some reason, yeah, OK. For some reason, it's not writing the files to the right. Oh, my bad. I see what happened. Wrong path. It's a little bit confusing because it's supposed to be the relative path to the node executable. So that's a little weird. So it just didn't write the files to the right place. So time travel debugging is this interesting area of research. And what does it take to actually time travel and step back into an application? Basically, what you need to be able to do is checkpoint your app at different points in time. And so what that entails is, every so often we need to be able to take a checkpoint, and then in between those checkpoints, we need a way to actually deterministically replay all of the events in your application, right? So in this case, right, I was using this math.random variable, right? And so I'm going to go ahead and step back and then step into the getInspiration method. We actually will record every single time that there's some non-deterministic thing that we can't actually replay. We'll actually record those instances. So in this case, you'll see that the message that we ended up getting back was anything is possible, and we can actually look and we can see that the message that we received was anything is possible there. And that's because we actually recorded the result of the math.random. And then the other thing that's interesting is that the real innovation here is that in the past, time travel debugging just wasn't really accessible to people. And it never really made its way into applications because there's some performance impact to it. And oftentimes it would be as much as like 2 times or something like that. That just wasn't really doable for a real scenario. And because it actually takes a lot. You're capturing a lot of state. You're capturing your entire process state and everything like that. And so the key innovation is that this actually came out of Microsoft research, is that they figured out a way to actually minimize the amount of state that needs to be captured, right? So, and we do that by actually taking advantage of runtime behavior, right? So we figure, hey, the runtime is actually doing a lot of work here, right? And the runtime is doing, it knows when it's performing a garbage collection. Hey, that's pretty interesting. So when it performs a garbage collection, we know that it's going to be a minimal amount of state. So now that's probably a pretty good time to actually checkpoint the application, right? Because now we don't have to take it, capture the entire process. We just capture a very small subset of that. And so there's all sorts of different optimizations that are similar to that. I'm not going to go into all of them, but if you're interested in the research paper, I can give you a pointer after the talk, that actually go into making all of that possible. And so what we've seen is that there's actually something like less than a 10 to 20% perf impact. And it's actually been on the lower side, but I just hesitate on actually quoting anything before we test it with bigger real-world applications. But our benchmarks have actually been performing really well. And so now is actually a time where you could actually envision putting this into production, or being able to debug locally. User studies locally tend to show that it's like under 25% is perf impact people tend to be okay with in debuggers. But so so that's actually, just thought it was interesting and wanted to share a little bit of the magic behind how all that time travel debugging worked. And it's something that's applicable to any runtime. I think it actually originally started, it was .NET was originally instrumented with it, and then lately the focus has been on Chakra Core. And so it's something that you can actually pick that up and start playing around. And it's not specific to Chakra, at least the actual logic there. So let's go ahead and stop the app, and we'll go ahead and jump back to the slides. So I promised you the bobblehead application. So there's a quick blog post on how to actually make that work, because it does some face recognition first, or face detection. Face recognition is slightly different. So face detection, and then it'll crop and rotate the face, and then put it all together into a GIF. So it's fun to play around with. And you should totally check it out. And then I also recommend taking a look at the Node.js guidelines repo that we put out there. So we actually have the table that I showed you with all of the native modules stuff, findings and cheat sheet somewhere in there, along with a bunch of other tips that we found. We're just helpful to people who are just getting started with Node, and so we just kind of made it like a space where we could dump all of those ideas and things that we see, because working on developer tools basically means that you turn into this somewhat of a Node therapist, because everyone tells you what their problems are, and so we figured we'd share a lot of those learnings. And then I also urge you to go download Visual Studio Code, and please let us know what you think. We'd absolutely love to hear your feedback, especially if it happens to come in the form of a pull request. Thank you.